Hi guys, what's up? Welcome to the channel. My name's Jared. Today we're going to be starting a multi-part series on the Skyline. We've got quite a few things we're going to install and change, upgrade and replace on this car now that it is more than 20 years old. I just want to do a bit of preventative maintenance to make sure I don't have any problems in the future. Also, we got a few upgrades which will hopefully get us ready for the dyno to make a bit more power. So I'll just show you what I've got installed for the next few episodes. So here we got a bit of array of parts ready to go on for the car. We'll just start over on the left here, and we can see we've got some gaskets here. So the first part of this series is going to be taking off the intake plenum to port it out, and these are some replacement gaskets for the intake manifold. Following on from that, we have a new set of coil packs. There's nothing wrong with my coil packs at the moment, just that they're quite old, and based on what I've seen online, mine are probably due for replacement or about to fail. Then after that, I've got some new spark plugs again, good to go to the dyno with a fresh set of plugs. I got a new water pump as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to do this at this time, maybe later in the future with some cooling mods. This was a ABS sensor wire. I've already replaced that because I damaged mine previously. Then I just got some clips. I ordered some replacement body clips, but they've sent me ones that are slightly too big. I also ordered a new PCV valve, but fortunately the new rocker covers I ordered came with a PCV valve, a new one, replacement. And then that gets us onto these rocker covers. So I bought these off eBay for $130, which was, it's just astounding that they can make two rocker covers and give you a cap, PCV valve, these fittings, and also new seals. So my ones weren't leaking. There was a bit of weepage, but since we're going so deep into the engine, I figured now's the best time to replace these. They even come with new hardware as well. And following on from that, I've got a new lightweight crank pulley and a new idler pulley to replace as well. And then finally over here you can see I've got two exhaust manifolds. I've had these for over a year now. I picked them up with part of the downpipes that I got before. These are a cheap eBay version that are going to need a bit of work, so we're going to have to port these and do a bit of welding and make sure the flanges are flat before we continue. First we're going to start off, in my case, by removing the strut tower bar. Then I'm going to remove my airbox and move on to the engine cover. Then go ahead and remove your intake. Then there's a vacuum line for the evap at the back of the engine, which you'll need to remove, followed by the hose for the brake booster. Then we can move on to removing all of the bolts that hold the intake manifold down. These are around the perimeter and the 6 in the middle. Then you'll need to remove this coolant line which runs to the throttle body. In this case I've taken it off and put a cap on there to stop it leaking. Then we can go ahead and pull up on the up intake manifold. I've previously siliconed this gasket on with my plenum spacer, so I'm just having to pull it off and remove it. And once it's up, you can get access to the other coolant line to the throttle body at the back of the intake. And at this point, you're able to remove the upper part of the intake plenum. Then we can move on to the lower one, which is going to start by removing the 6 bolts holding down the rest of the manifold gasket. Then there's 2 bolts holding on the fuel pressure damper / regulator on the left. Then there's 2 nuts at the front and the back of the plenum. And in my case, I have my catch can connected to this line at the front from the PCV valve. Then there's a couple more bolts holding on brackets for the wiring harness at the front. Then we can lift up and remove the other part. Once you've got it on the bench, you can go ahead and remove the other part of that coolant hose, which we couldn't get access to in the engine bay. And go ahead and remove the 4 bolts holding on the throttle body so we can get access to port behind it later. So I've gotten out the 2 parts of this upper intake manifold, and as you can see, I've cleaned them up and got the oil off. Still got this piece on the engine because when I line up the gasket, this is already quite well ported. I'll show you compared on this piece. So as you can see, I've got the holes lined up and there's quite a bit of material on the edge of the gasket which needs to be removed. This is the gasket on that part on the engine. And as you can see, there isn't that big overlap like on the other piece. And then inside that cylinder, you can see where the 2 parts meet. It's pretty smooth. This one's cylinder 3, it's pretty good. And cylinder 5, that's also pretty good, just a bit dirty. The only thing I'm worried about taking this piece off is taking these injectors out and potentially damaging one of the O-rings, because they have not been out for 20 years now. I'm worried that when they go back in, they might not seal properly, and then I'll have to take everything off again. It's not a quick job. And then the other thing too is, even if I port the lower part and I bolt it back on, I haven't ported the actual inlet to the cylinder head. So I actually might create a step which will be worse for it. So I think all I'm going to do is try and clean out inside this lower part and just leave it how it is at the moment. Because later when I change the rocker covers, I don't need to take off that part. I can just do it from here easily. But coming back to these pieces, this one will definitely need to be ported. And I believe the biggest restriction is in this lower part, where the air flows over the top of these pieces into each cylinder. That's why they made these plenum spaces, just to create a bit more distance for the air to flow over the top. So I believe if we can take a little bit material off the top here and then also open the port slightly on each of them, I think that will make a big difference. On this upper piece, the biggest restriction is going to be in this elbow. I have the NWP upgraded throttle body, so this is the adapter that goes on it. It's hard to tell, but this piece they made is actually tapered to meet the contour of the original intake manifold. But you can see there's definitely a step there still. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this adapter and grind down to make these 2 surfaces the same height. And then also on the elbow, we're going to try and open it. And also on this side and this opening, going to clean up some of these steps here and make it slightly larger. So these are the tools you're going to need. First is a die grinder, whether it be pneumatic like this or electric. And then you're going to need some rotary bits, preferably made out of tungsten carbide, and these are specifically for metal, whether it be aluminium or steel. These are some shorter ones, and then I've gone and bought these longer shanked ones recently. These ones are going to be more ideal for getting inside here, and also deeper inside here. So as you can see with this short one, you're very limited by how deep you can go. Just a quick PPE check when you're using these grinders, if it's your first time, highly recommend the goggles, these gloves, because the little filings that come off the steel are very small and they get into your skin. And definitely the earmuffs if you're listening to that loud grinder and the air compressor kicking on all the time. As we get started with the grinder, you can see it makes quite a lot of mess, and it is not a particularly fast process, so you're going to need to take your time and be patient. As you can see here, I've had a pretty good go at this inlet here. So now that the inside matches the NWP bolt-on plate there, when you're doing this, you need to spend a bit of time on this inside corner. The outside flows quite well, but the inside here had this big hump, which you can still see some remnants of, and there's this groove or channel that comes through. So I've just gone and knocked down the tops of those, and I've spent as much time as I can trying to get that inside corner to flow quite as good as possible. This other end is a bit harder to get to. As you can see, I've tried to work on that inside corner and just to transition to the center part. Here I'm just laying down the old gasket with some bolts to hold it in place. Then I'm using a paint texture to mark where I need to remove the material later with the grinder. As you can see, there's quite a bit of overlap on this piece. First off, I'm just starting by removing the metal up to the paint lines, which we just previously marked. After that, then I'll work on the angle and the transition to make sure it's not very sharp. The top part, I'm using the angle grinder with a flat disc, as it's much quicker than the grinder and leaves a smoother finish. Next, I'm going to make a start on opening up these ports. So as you can see, the air is going to come over the top and then in. So taking the material off the top is going to be one of our best bets. We need to make sure that all of these are the same so that the airflow between every cylinder is equal. So I've just got this tool, it's used for inside measuring, and I've just got it set to the exact height that they are at the moment, and they're all pretty much exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to port one and then use that setting for the other two. So now I finish this other piece. You can see now these ports are open quite a bit, and I've just worked on the transition going into the intake manifold. You have to flip it up when you're doing it to get both sides like that. And then on the inside, I ended up doing this top bit with the flat disc on the grinder, just because it's a bit quicker and it gives you a smoother finish. And I've just done the top bit on these three. Then I've gone and did a bit of work on the transition from the top to the bottom there and opened it up slightly. This one I found was easier when you put it upside down like this and worked on it. Next, I'm going to use these flat discs, which I can put on the grinder as well, just to try and clean up some of the surface and polish it up from the grinding marks.
Here I'm just using a wire wheel on the drill to remove the oxidization on the upper plenum, because we're going to paint this next. This is just going to help the paint to adhere later. Then I'm just hitting it with some wax and grease remover on the pneumatic gun just to try and blow out any impurities after we cleaned it up previously. Then go ahead and tape up any of the fittings and ports that we don't want to paint. I like to use the heat gun on the piece before I paint it, just to try and get it warm. This is going to help the reaction process for the wrinkling later. Once you start to see the wrinkling occur, you want to go and hit it with the heat gun to try and make sure the finish is as uniform as possible.
So you can see now, just finished the paint, the wrinkle finish on this upper intake manifold. So what I am planning to do is, I'm not going to run the cover, this factory cover here, because I believe that as the heat rises, it's going to get trapped underneath that cover and make this part of the intake hot. So I want to see whether we can get cooler temps by not running that cover. And next we're going to do a cooling mod, which is essentially replacing this hose that usually goes under like that with a vacuum slash coolant cap like this. This is one I picked up from a local store. It's just a 5/16 cap, and essentially what it's going to do is the in and outlet for the coolant here, we're going to cap off those hoses. In climates where it's much warmer, like in Australia here, there's no real need for this coolant to run through the intake. All it's going to do later is heat the air coming through the intake before it goes to the engine. And for power, that's not going to help us, because higher intake temps are going to result in less dense air, which is going to be less power. You can see here already I've just got a different cap. I'm going to replace this one, but that is an example where we're going to put one of the caps in that pipe. And then the other cap is going to go on the end of this coolant pipe just here. So you're going to remove that pipe and put another cap on there. So normally it goes into the intake manifold from here, through it, and then down into that fitting there. Alright guys, that wraps up this part of the video with getting the intake and the mods sorted for that. The next video we're going to move on to the exhaust manifolds, which is going to be porting those out and also removing the old ones and installing the new ones. It's going to be quite a bit of work. And then we'll finish off with some of our preventative mods that I showed you at the start of this episode. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If not, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.